I'm a Deputy Director in Discovery and Translational Sciences at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'd like to begin by thanking the organisers, the Financial News and the Korea Research Institute for Chemical Technology for inviting me to speak to you tonight. I'm going to talk to you about the priorities for drug discovery and global health as we at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation regard the priorities. I'm mostly going to talk to you this evening about antiviral drug discovery, in particular with respect to pandemic preparedness. But before I do so, I would like to talk a little bit about other priorities. In terms of the infectious diseases, there's still a major need to identify drug candidates for tuberculosis. What we're looking for there is a shorter, safer, and simpler regimen, something which could reduce the duration of treatment down to 2 months, and which would come with the ability to treat any person with TB, active against all tuberculosis strains. We need a combination of at least 3 agents, and so although there are agents in the pipeline, we need to deliver more to ensure that we're going to be successful. For malaria, there's a need to discover agents to make sure that we can overcome drug resistance. In particular, we're very focused on looking for agents that don't have the potential to generate resistance. They work through different mechanisms. We're trying to improve compliance, in particular by finding a drug combination that would be a single pill that would cure an infection. And then also thinking about the longer term, driving towards elimination and eradication, looking for agents which have the potential to block transmission and to prevent relapsing disease. There's also a long list of diseases in the neglected tropical disease space where there is a need for better drugs, or to replace, either to replace existing drugs or to have much more potent agents which are much more powerful. And I'm not going to go through all these diseases, but there's clearly a need to do much more in that area to meet the needs of individuals living in low and middle income countries. Turning to the topic of viral pandemics, the question that faced us back in 2020 when COVID-19 was first discovered was, could existing drugs be used to treat COVID-19? And I'm going to talk to you about a few programs that the Gates Foundation was engaged in at the very beginning of the pandemic. The first was to screen a collection of drugs known as the Reframe collection, which contains about 12,000 agents that have been either registered drugs or have been tested in humans previously. This collection by our partner Caliber was tested in about 25 different screens around the world. Now, unfortunately, no antiviral compounds were identified that were more potent than remdesivir. And so we had a limited success with that effort. But at the same time, we were able to move very quickly together with Wellcome and the MasterCard Foundation to set up the COVID-19 Therapeutics Accelerator. This also raised money from 16 additional donors, and it supported a lot of efforts on small molecule drug discovery, on antibodies and diagnostics, to really see if we could find agents which could be used as quickly as possible. And then the Gates Foundation also joined in a program in Europe called CARE, or the Corona Accelerated R&D in Europe program. This is a major effort. It's a 5-year effort with many institutes around Europe and many pharma and academic partners. There was an emergency track which was also looking for drugs to be repurposed, and again, unfortunately, that was unsuccessful. But most of the effort now is in the preparedness track and looking for new agents which have activity across all coronaviruses. And that's supported by a clinical trials track, some preclinical assessment, and an effort to identify immune markers that would allow us better to select patients. So these were some of the initial efforts that we went through. But what is the current situation with antivirals? Well, there are a few drugs available. I've mentioned remdesivir, but there are two other agents, molnupiravir and Paxlovid, or nirmatrelvir plus ritonavir. And the latter two were really accelerated discovery during the pandemic. And in particular, nirmatrelvir had a pretty remarkable story of going from an early lead all the way to a clinical candidate and all the way to registration in a little more than 18 months. So it did show that with some preparation, we could actually come up with agents, and both molnupiravir and Paxlovid are orally active agents. I would also mention here that two of these have been licensed to the Medicines Patent Pool, and that's a very important consideration for the Foundation. That helps to make drugs available in low and middle income countries. But are these drugs good enough? Well, I think there's actually a lot of room for improvement here. These drugs, although very powerful, have quite a high pill burden. The doses are pretty high. And there's also the potential issue of drug-drug interactions, particularly because of the use of ritonavir. They're also taken twice daily. And so the next generation of agents would potentially be a once daily and much more potent agent, which would mean many fewer pills. And the possibility of coming up with a combination agent where you combine different mechanisms to avoid the possibility of the emergence of resistance. Of course, ideally, you would eventually want to get to something which is a single pill, which you would take at the onset of symptoms, or if you've been exposed to disease, that would actually completely cure. But that is a pretty high bar to reach. So what did we learn? Well, I think the first and most obvious thing to say is that we were unprepared. We did not have an arsenal of drugs that were suitable for treating coronaviruses. And this is shown up by the repurposing effort. And many clinical trials have taken place of repurposing compounds, but these have pretty limited utility, and especially as antiviral agents. Most of them have been involved in disease modification. And so what we really need is to focus much more upstream in the course of the disease and have agents which are suitable for people who have only just been exposed or even pre-exposure prophylaxis. But we need to get ahead of this before any other pandemic strikes. So we took a step back and thought very much about how might we help to be better prepared for the next pandemic. And in talking to many people, we identified a number of possibilities. The first really is to think about which viral families have the greatest potential, and we really identified coronaviruses, obviously, orthomyxoviruses, in other words, influenza, pandemic influenza, and some of the paramyxoviruses, particularly Nipah and Hendra, which have significant potential to cause a pandemic. We also thought about which modalities could be most easily used. So we've really focused on the development of small molecules. These would inhibit either viral targets or targets in the host that are critical for replication of a virus. We could also think about agents that stimulate the general immune responses in response to a viral infection. It's not good enough to just discover early leads, though. What we would like to do is to take these, optimize them, and take them all the way through to phase 1. Had we been prepared in 2020 with agents which were ready to go and active against coronaviruses, we would have been in a much better situation to be able to move very quickly. So how does one bring a program like this together? Well, it really requires a lot of investment in the early science and the preclinical tools. And so it's all about understanding the viruses, developing assays and model systems, But it's also critical that these are available for use by anybody who wants to do drug development. So there needs to be data sharing and also access commitments for any agents which are actually developed. So we would encourage open access publication, data sharing on pre-competitive activities, and bringing these programs together in as much an open fashion as possible. It's critical to engage professional drug discovery. That comes from many different sources. Pharma, biotech are the obvious ones, but also many non-profits and contract research organizations that we really need the tools together to be able to do the drug discovery. And then finally, it's very difficult for any single organization to work on its own. And so bringing together the public and the private sector, leveraging the capacity wherever it is, and integrating and coordinating efforts is going to be really important if we're going to be prepared for the future. With that in mind, we have established something called the Pandemic Antiviral Discovery Partnership, or the PAD partnership. This was an effort that came together with the Novo Nordisk Foundation, Open Philanthropy, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the goal really matches this strategy that I just described, which is to find compounds which are through phase 1 or phase 2 ready small molecule candidates that are suitable for oral delivery and can be deployed quickly. We have committed an initial investment of up to $90 million. And the scope of this really is the early development of agents active against the viruses that I mentioned. The target product profiles, though, are really critical. These need to be suitable for global deployment, and keeping in mind global access principles to ensure that there is readiness for any agent to be used wherever it is needed. So what's different from this partnership with many of the others? I think we've been very open about being willing to take some unconventional approaches, some higher risk approaches. We, in the longer term, are thinking beyond coronaviruses, so thinking about other pandemic threats. But I think the critical thing is equitable access, which really is at the core of our mission. So I'd just like to end by summarizing some of these priorities. So there is an ongoing need for new treatments for TB, malaria, and neglected tropical diseases, and that requires ongoing significant investment. But antivirals can play an important role in future pandemics, but they'll only play that role if we can be prepared for what we need in the future. We need to look at innovation very carefully, but anything that we do develop really needs to be developed and be suited for global deployment. We need to coordinate, we need to integrate, and as I've demonstrated with the PAD initiative, this can really increase efficiency by working much more closely together. And finally, I just reinforce this point that we need equitable access. That's the only way we'll stop an emerging pathogen, is if agents are available to anybody in the world wherever they're needed. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and thank you.